Reaction looks fast. It feels decisive. It is not strength. Reaction gives control away. It hands your mind to pressure, emotion, and noise. And once control is gone, outcomes follow chaos. Stillness is not delay. Stillness is command. It is the pause where choice returns. This audiobook is about removing weakness at the root. Not by force. By discipline. When reaction stops, authority begins. And everything changes from there. Most people believe they are acting. They are not. They are reacting. Reaction feels fast. It feels decisive. It feels productive. It is none of those things. Reaction is automatic. It bypasses judgment. It skips evaluation. It hands control to whatever appears first. A message arrives. You respond immediately. A tone changes. You adjust emotionally. A delay happens. You feel irritation. A plan shifts. You rush to fix it. This is not control. This is exposure. When you react instantly, you surrender authority. You allow speed to replace thinking. You allow impulse to replace choice. And most people live this way without noticing. They confuse movement with intention. They confuse response with leadership. They confuse urgency with importance. That is the mistake. Reaction is not strength. Reaction is weakness dressed as action. Stillness is where control begins. Between what happens and what you do next, there is a pause. That pause is usually ignored. It is rushed through. It is dismissed as unnecessary. That pause is the key. Without it, choice does not exist. Without it, emotion leads. Without it, outcomes are predictable. You have a choice. But only if you slow the moment down. Most people do not. They feel first. Then they speak. Then they act. Emotion drives. The mind follows. And later, they explain. They justify. They regret. This is not bad intention. It is untrained behavior. Reaction is cheap. Anyone can do it. Discipline is trained. When something triggers you, the body reacts before the mind engages. Heart rate increases. Thoughts accelerate. Words line up, ready to escape. This is the moment most damage is done. Messages sent too fast. Decisions made too early. Words spoken without clarity. The cost is subtle but cumulative. Authority erodes. Trust weakens. Respect diminishes. Not because you were wrong, but because you were rushed. You do not need their permission to pause. You do not need approval to think. You do not need urgency to respond with speed. That's the key. Speed is rarely required. It is usually assumed. Most pressure is artificial. Most urgency is inherited. Someone else's impatience becomes your command. That is not leadership. That is obedience. Stillness interrupts this pattern. Not silence forever. Not avoidance. Interruption. The moment something happens, your job is not to fix it. Your job is not to respond. Your job is to notice. Notice the physical reaction. Notice the mental push. Notice the urge to act. Do nothing yet. This is not suppression. This is control. It's not about emotion. It's about discipline. Emotions will appear. They always do. Anger. Anxiety. Excitement. Fear. They are signals. Not commands. Most people treat them as instructions. That is the error. When criticism arrives, reaction wants defense. Explanation. Justification. Control asks a different question. Is there anything useful here? If yes, extract it. If no, discard it. You do not need their permission to remain silent. That's the key. When plans change, reaction creates drama. Control creates adjustment. Reaction says this should not be happening. Control says this is happening. Only one of those produces progress. Reaction looks backward. Control looks forward. This is where authority is built. Not in speed. Not in volume. In restraint. A pause of 3 seconds prevents unnecessary conflict. A pause of 10 seconds prevents emotional mistakes. A pause of 1 minute can protect years of work. Stillness is not passive. It is preparatory. It allows alignment before action. Most people are proud of being fast. They answer quickly. They decide quickly. They react quickly. And they pay quietly. Control does not advertise itself. It shows up in outcomes. People trust those who are not rushed. People follow those who are not reactive. Authority does not explain itself. It acts deliberately. You have a choice. Every time something triggers you, you can react. Or you can pause. One leaks power. The other concentrates it. That's the key. Start training this immediately. When a message arrives, wait. Read it fully. Then wait again. When emotion spikes, breathe. Observe the sensation. Let it settle. When pressure appears, slow your movement. Speed up clarity instead. This is a skill. It improves with repetition. The first time will feel uncomfortable. The second time will feel intentional. Eventually, it will feel natural. That is discipline replacing impulse. You are not trying to become calm. You are becoming controlled. Calm is a byproduct. Control is the goal. Most mistakes in life are not caused by lack of intelligence. They are caused by lack of pause. Reaction makes decisions for you. Stillness gives them back. You have a choice. Practice it. Reaction ends when discipline begins. You learned how speed steals control. Now it's time to understand what happens when silence replaces reaction. Control does not arrive through force. It arrives through timing. The pause is where timing lives. Most people think the pause is empty. It is not. The pause is active. It is structured. It is intentional. And it is almost never used. When something happens, the body reacts immediately. Thoughts accelerate. Emotion rises. Words prepare themselves. This happens before awareness. That is why most responses are automatic. They feel chosen. They are not. The pause interrupts this chain. Without the pause, reaction completes itself. With the pause, choice becomes available. That's the key. Most people never control the pause because they never recognize it. They move from stimulus to response without interruption. Message. Reply. Tone. Emotion. Pressure. Action. There is no space. And where there is no space, there is no control. You have a choice. But it only appears inside the pause. The pause is not long. It does not need to be dramatic. It can be a single breath. A moment of stillness. A deliberate delay. That is enough. Speed is not required to be effective. Clarity is. Most urgency is artificial. Most pressure is transferred, not necessary. Someone else rushes. You absorb it. Someone else panics. You move faster. That is how control leaks away. You do not need their permission to slow down. That's the key. The pause allows the nervous system to settle. It allows the mind to re-enter. It restores alignment between thought and action. Without it, emotion leads. With it, discipline leads. This is not theory. This is mechanics. When you pause, heart rate lowers. Breathing stabilizes. Thought becomes structured. That is when judgment returns. Reaction disappears when judgment arrives. Most people are proud of being quick. They respond fast. They decide fast. They move fast. They confuse speed with competence. Competence is precision. Precision requires time. Even a small amount. The pause creates that time. This is where authority begins. People trust those who are not rushed. People follow those who are not reactive. Stillness signals control. Not silence forever. Not withdrawal. Control. When you speak after a pause, words land differently. They carry weight. They feel considered. When you act after a pause, movement is efficient. It solves instead of escalates. This is why restraint outperforms speed. Most conflicts exist because neither side paused. Most mistakes exist because timing was ignored. The pause would have prevented them. That's the key. You are not training yourself to hesitate. You are training yourself to decide. Hesitation is fear-based. The pause is discipline-based. There is a difference. Fear freezes. Discipline waits intentionally. The pause is not empty waiting. It is active observation. You notice what is happening inside you. You notice what is happening around you. You notice what is actually required. Most reactions solve nothing. They release energy. Control redirects energy. This is where leverage lives. A delayed response often produces a better outcome than a fast one. A measured action often removes the need for explanation later. Silence, used correctly, does more work than speech. You don't need their permission to let silence do its job. That's the key. Start training this deliberately. When something triggers you, pause before speaking. Not to suppress. To evaluate. Ask one question internally. What is the most controlled response available? Not the fastest. Not the loudest. The most controlled. When urgency appears, slow physical movement. Sit still. Breathe evenly. Let the body calm first. Then decide. The body must settle before the mind can lead. Most people reverse this order. They act while the body is activated. Then the mind rationalizes afterward. That creates inconsistency. Control restores order. The pause is how order is enforced. It's not about emotion. It's about discipline. Emotion will appear regardless. Discipline determines what happens next. That's the key. At first, the pause will feel uncomfortable. You will feel pressure to respond. You will feel exposed. That discomfort is withdrawal from reaction. Stay there. Do not rush to escape it. Each time you pause, you weaken automatic behavior. Each time you pause, you strengthen choice. This is how habits change. Not through motivation. Through interruption. The pause interrupts old patterns. With repetition, the pause becomes natural. You stop reacting without effort. Control becomes default. This is the shift. Life stops feeling chaotic. Decisions stop feeling rushed. Outcomes become predictable. Not because circumstances changed. Because timing did. You have a choice. Use the pause. Control does not require explanation. It requires discipline. Reaction speaks immediately. Control waits, then acts. One leaks power. The other concentrates it. That's the key. You are not becoming slower. You are becoming precise. Precision wins long term. You learned how to create space between stimulus and response. Now it's time to understand what fills that space. Most people believe observation is passive. It is not. Observation is discipline without movement. When you observe without interfering, you gather information without distortion. You see what is happening as it is, not as emotion wants it to be. Interference changes outcomes. Observation clarifies them. That difference matters. Most people interfere immediately. They comment. They correct. They explain. They insert themselves into situations before understanding them. That impulse feels responsible. It feels engaged. It is not. It is control lost early. When you interfere too soon, you contaminate the situation with your emotion. You narrow options. You lock yourself into positions you did not need to take. Observation keeps options open. That's the key. To observe without interfering, you must resist the urge to act. Not forever. Not passively. Just long enough to see clearly. Clarity always arrives before the right action. Never after. Most people reverse this order. They act first. Then they justify. That creates noise. When you observe, you notice patterns. Tone. Timing. Intent. These details are invisible to reactive minds. A reactive person hears words. An observer hears meaning. A reactive person sees behavior. An observer sees motivation. This is leverage. Observation allows you to respond proportionally. Not excessively. Not emotionally. Proportion is control. Stillness makes proportion possible. You have a choice. You can jump in. Or you can watch long enough to understand. Understanding always outperforms urgency. That's the key. Interference often comes from ego. The need to be seen. The need to be correct. The need to be involved. Observation requires restraint. Restraint builds authority. When you observe without reacting, people reveal more. They speak longer. They expose inconsistencies. They show priorities. Interference shuts this down. Silence invites truth. Not because it is manipulative. Because it removes pressure. People fill space when you don't. This gives you information. Information creates control. You don't need their permission to stay silent. That's the key. This applies everywhere. In conversations. In conflict. In work. In planning. When something goes wrong, observe before fixing. What failed? Why it failed? What variables are involved? Most people rush to repair symptoms. They ignore structure. Observation reveals structure. When emotions rise, observe the sensation. Where it appears. How it moves. What triggers it? Do not label it. Do not justify it. Just notice. This breaks identification. Emotion loses control when it is observed. Not suppressed. Observed. Stillness is the tool. That's the key. Interference often creates resistance. People push back when corrected too soon. Situations escalate when addressed prematurely. Observation prevents unnecessary conflict. When you wait, timing improves. When timing improves, outcomes improve. This is not avoidance. This is strategy. Avoidance hides. Observation prepares. Preparation is power. Most people feel pressure to respond immediately because silence feels exposed. They fear being misunderstood. They fear losing control. In reality, silence restores control. The one who speaks less often controls the frame. Not through dominance. Through precision. Every word you do not say preserves leverage. That's the key. Start practicing this deliberately. When someone speaks, do not interrupt. Do not plan your response while they talk. Listen fully. Notice pauses. Notice emphasis. Notice what is not said. This information shapes better decisions than any fast reply. When something irritates you, do not correct it immediately. Watch it unfold. See if it resolves itself. See if it reveals a pattern. Most issues solve themselves when not fueled. Interference feeds them. Observation starves them. This is emotional economy. Energy is finite. Spend it where it matters. Reaction wastes energy. Observation conserves it. That's the key. You are not disengaging from life. You are engaging with it accurately. Accuracy beats intensity. Stillness allows accuracy. When you finally act after observing, action is clean. It is direct. It does not require explanation. Because it fits the situation. Poor timing requires justification. Good timing does not. You don't need their permission to act later instead of now. That's the key. Observation also reveals yourself. Your triggers. Your habits. Your blind spots. You see how often the urge to interfere appears. You see how unnecessary it usually is. This awareness creates self-control. Control begins internally. You cannot manage the outside if you interfere internally. Observation starts inside first. Notice your impulse. Do nothing with it. Let it pass. This is how discipline is built. Not by force. By repetition. Each time you observe without interfering, you strengthen restraint. Restraint compounds. Eventually, interference feels unnatural. That is mastery. Stillness becomes default. You move only when movement adds value. That's the key. You are learning to separate action from impulse. To separate response from emotion. This is not weakness. It is strength refined. Those who act less often, act better. Those who speak less often, are heard more. Those who observe longest, decide best. This is the advantage. You learned how to create space. You learned how to hold it without interference. Now it's time to understand what happens when silence replaces explanation. Silence is not absence. It is presence without noise. Most people speak to fill space. They explain to relieve tension. They justify to protect ego. This feels responsible. It feels cooperative. It weakens authority. When you explain too early, you shift power outward. You invite judgment. You open unnecessary debate. Silence closes those doors. That's the key. Silence forces situations to resolve themselves. It removes fuel. It creates gravity. Most problems grow because they are fed. With words. With emotion. With reaction. Silence starves them. This is not avoidance. It is discipline. Stillness allows reality to surface without distortion. When you rush to explain, you assume misunderstanding. Often, there is none. When you rush to justify, you assume accusation. Often, there is none. You create pressure that did not exist. Silence prevents this. You have a choice. You can explain yourself. Or you can let your position stand. One seeks approval. The other signals certainty. That's the key. Authority does not rush to clarify. It waits. Not because it is superior. Because it is stable. Stability communicates more than words ever will. Most people fear silence because it feels exposed. They worry about being misunderstood. They worry about losing control of the narrative. In reality, silence controls the narrative. The person who speaks less sets the frame. When you remain silent, others speak more. They reveal assumptions. They reveal intent. Information flows toward silence. This is leverage. Silence does not argue. It observes. An observation always wins before action begins. You don't need their permission to stay silent. That's the key. Consider how often explanations are unnecessary. A delay happens. You rush to explain why. A decision is made. You rush to justify it. A boundary is set. You rush to soften it with words. Each time, authority weakens. Not because the action was wrong. Because the explanation diluted it. Silence allows actions to carry their own weight. When something is correct, it does not need defense. Defense signals doubt. Restraint signals confidence. That's the key. Silence also protects emotional control. Words spoken too early are often driven by feeling, not clarity. Once spoken, they cannot be withdrawn. Silence prevents irreversible damage. It allows emotion to pass before commitment is made. Emotion fades. Words remain. Discipline respects this difference. It's not about suppression. It's about timing. Timing is discipline. Most people speak to discharge emotion. They feel relief afterward. They also feel regret. Silence delays discharge until clarity arrives. Clarity always produces better outcomes. You have a choice. You can speak to feel better now. Or you can remain silent and act better later. One serves emotion. The other serves control. That's the key. Silence is especially powerful under pressure. When expectations rise. When conflict appears. When others demand immediate response. Pressure tries to rush you. Silence resists that pull. Not by force. By refusal to move prematurely. When you do not rush, pressure loses leverage. Urgency collapses when it is not answered. This is strategic calm. Stillness under pressure separates leaders from reactors. Leaders pause. Reactors explain. One moves outcomes. The other manages anxiety. Silence also creates psychological space. It allows others to reflect. It invites reconsideration. Words close loops. Silence opens them. Open loops create flexibility. Flexibility creates advantage. That's the key. This does not mean never speaking. It means speaking only when words add value. Most words do not. Most words are emotional noise. Silence filters that noise out. When you finally speak after silence, words land differently. They carry intention. They feel measured. People listen. Not because you speak louder, but because you speak less often. This is vocal discipline. It mirrors physical discipline. You don't move unless movement is necessary. You don't speak unless speech improves the outcome. This is control applied consistently. Practice this deliberately. The next time you feel the urge to explain, pause. Let the urge pass. Ask yourself one question. Do these words improve the situation? If the answer is no, remain silent. Silence is doing the work. When challenged, do not defend immediately. Hold your position. Let time reveal alignment. Time supports what is correct. Silence allows time to operate. You don't need their permission to let time work. That's the key. Silence also strengthens internal discipline. Each time you hold back words, you train restraint. Restraint compounds. Eventually, silence becomes natural. You stop feeling the need to explain. You stop seeking validation. Your actions speak without assistance. This is maturity. Not emotional maturity. Behavioral maturity. Stillness applied consistently. Most people talk themselves into weaker positions. They negotiate against themselves. They reveal uncertainty unnecessarily. Silence prevents self-sabotage. It keeps your position intact. That's the key. You are not becoming distant. You are becoming precise. Precision eliminates excess. Silence is precision in communication. When silence feels uncomfortable, that is training. Discomfort signals growth. Stay there. Do not escape it with words. Each moment of restraint strengthens authority. Eventually, you will notice something shift. People stop pressing. They stop demanding explanations. They adjust to your pace. Because you no longer respond on theirs. This is control without force. Silence reshapes dynamics quietly. No confrontation required. No dominance displayed. Just discipline maintained. You have a choice. Fill space with words. Or let silence shape outcomes. One dissipates power. The other concentrates it. That's the key. You learned how silence works externally. Now it's time to understand what happens when silence is applied internally. Most people believe silence is external. It is not. The real noise lives inside. Thoughts rush. Narratives form. Judgments repeat. This inner dialogue runs constantly. Unchallenged. Untrained. And it shapes behavior before action begins. If you do not discipline this internal voice, external restraint will not hold. That's the key. The inner dialogue is where reaction is rehearsed. By the time words leave your mouth or actions begin, the decision has already been made internally. Most people never notice this. They believe the problem is what they said. Or what they did. The problem started earlier. It started with a thought that was never questioned. You have a choice. You can obey every internal statement. Or you can observe it without attachment. One creates chaos. The other creates control. The mind speaks constantly. That is not the issue. The issue is obedience. Most people treat thoughts as commands. If the mind says react, they react. If it says explain, they explain. If it says defend, they defend. This feels natural. It is not disciplined. Thoughts are impulses, not instructions. That distinction matters. Stillness begins internally. Before you pause externally, you must pause mentally. The inner pause is subtle, but powerful. A thought appears. You notice it. You do nothing with it. That is discipline. You are not trying to stop thought. You are removing its authority. That's the key. Most inner dialogue is repetitive. It replays past events. It predicts future problems. It builds stories that feel urgent but are rarely accurate. This internal noise creates emotional pressure. Pressure seeks release. Release becomes reaction. Control breaks this chain at the source. When a thought arises, do not argue with it. Do not justify it. Do not suppress it. Observe it. Observation dissolves identification. A thought observed loses momentum. This is mechanics, not philosophy. The mind quiets when it is seen clearly, not when it is forced. That's the key. Most people try to replace negative thoughts with positive ones. This creates internal conflict. Control does not fight thought. It disengages from it. Disengagement is strength. When you stop feeding the inner dialogue with attention, it weakens. Attention is fuel. Remove fuel. The fire reduces. Stillness is not empty. It is focused awareness without commentary. This is where clarity emerges. You have a choice. When the inner voice demands explanation, pause. When it demands reaction, pause. Ask one question internally. Is this thought useful right now? If yes, apply it deliberately. If no, let it pass. You don't need their permission to ignore your own thoughts. That's the key. Most anxiety is not caused by reality. It is caused by unexamined inner dialogue. The mind predicts. It exaggerates. It catastrophizes. And the body reacts as if it were true. This creates urgency where none exists. Discipline removes false urgency. It slows internal tempo. When internal tempo slows, external behavior follows. You stop rushing. You stop explaining. You stop reacting. Because the pressure is gone. Inner silence produces outer control. This is the sequence. Most people try to control behavior directly. They fail. Because behavior is downstream. Thought is upstream. Stillness must be trained there first. That's the key. This does not mean disengaging from thinking altogether. It means choosing when thinking is allowed to lead. Deliberate thinking is slow. It is structured. It is intentional. Reactive thinking is fast. It is repetitive. It is emotional. Only one should guide action. Discipline decides which one speaks. Practice this daily. Sit quietly. No stimulation. No task. Watch the mind. You will notice how often it tries to pull you into commentary. Plans. Judgments. Replays. Do nothing. Let the thought complete itself without engagement. This trains detachment. Detachment is not apathy. It is clarity without attachment. Clarity produces better decisions. That's the key. When internal dialogue is disciplined, confidence stabilizes. You stop seeking reassurance. You stop narrating yourself. Because there is nothing to prove internally. Most over-explaining begins in the mind. You explain to yourself first. Then to others. Silence inside removes the need to explain outside. This is alignment. You act. You do not narrate. Stillness reduces internal friction. Energy stops leaking. Focus sharpens. You become harder to provoke. Not because you suppress emotion. Because emotion is no longer amplified by thought. Thought magnifies feeling. Remove magnification. Feeling passes quickly. That's the key. Discipline the inner dialogue and reaction loses its foundation. You no longer feel compelled to respond immediately. You no longer feel pulled into unnecessary explanation. Because the pressure that demanded action is gone. This is freedom. Not freedom to do whatever you want. Freedom from internal compulsion. That is real control. Most people are controlled from the inside. They mistake this for personality. It is conditioning. Discipline rewires it. Each time you observe a thought without acting, you reclaim authority. Each time you refuse to follow an internal impulse, control strengthens. This compounds quietly. Over time, the mind becomes an instrument. Not a driver. That is mastery. You will notice longer pauses between thought and action. Less noise. More precision. People will feel this. Not because you say anything. But because you move differently. Stillness becomes visible. That's the key. You are not eliminating thought. You are choosing leadership. The mind can advise. It no longer commands. This is discipline applied internally. And it changes everything. You learned how silence works externally. You learned how to discipline it internally. Now it's time to apply this control when pressure escalates. Pressure does not create weakness. It reveals it. Most people believe pressure changes them. It does not. It exposes what was already untrained. When pressure rises, reaction becomes visible. Speech speeds up. Decisions rush. Emotion leaks into action. This is not because pressure is strong. It is because discipline is weak. That's the key. Pressure is neutral. It does not demand reaction. It invites it. Most people accept the invitation automatically. They hurry. They explain. They justify. They overcorrect. Control disappears in these moments. Staying steady under pressure is not a personality trait. It is a trained behavior. Stillness does not vanish when pressure appears. It is tested. And most people fail that test because they never trained for it. You have a choice. You can let pressure dictate your pace. Or you can maintain your own. One leads to mistakes. The other leads to authority. That's the key. When pressure enters, the body reacts first. Muscles tighten. Breathing shortens. Thoughts accelerate. This is automatic. Discipline begins with recognizing this shift. The moment you notice activation, you slow down deliberately. Not mentally first. Physically. Slow movement sends a signal to the nervous system. Control returns to the body before it returns to the mind. This order matters. Most people try to think their way out of pressure. They fail. The body must settle first. Stillness under pressure starts with posture. Breathing. Reduced movement. This is not weakness. It is command. That's the key. Pressure feeds on speed. It loses power when pace is controlled. Urgency collapses when not matched. Someone else panics. You do not. Someone else rushes. You slow slightly. This contrast creates authority immediately. Not through dominance. Through stability. Stable people become reference points. Under pressure, people look for anchors. Be that anchor. You do not need their permission to remain steady. That's the key. Most errors under pressure come from premature action. Speaking before thinking. Deciding before evaluating. Pressure pushes toward closure. Discipline resists this push. It allows the full situation to reveal itself. Incomplete information produces poor decisions. Pressure tries to force decisions before clarity arrives. Stillness delays commitment until alignment is present. That delay is strategic. It protects outcomes. You are not refusing to act. You are refusing to act blindly. That distinction matters. When pressure rises, ask one internal question. What remains true right now? Not what feels urgent. Not what others demand. What is actually true? This anchors decision-making in reality. Emotion distorts reality. Stillness restores it. That's the key. Pressure also triggers the need to explain. To reassure. To defend. This weakens position. Explanation under pressure signals uncertainty. Silence under pressure signals confidence. Confidence calms situations faster than words. People mirror emotional tone. If you remain steady, others slow down. If you rush, chaos spreads. This is responsibility at a higher level. Your internal state influences the environment. Control it. Most people believe pressure justifies poor behavior. Harsh words. Short temper. Careless decisions. It does not. Pressure reveals discipline gaps. That's the key. When pressure becomes familiar, reaction loses its power. You stop being surprised by it. Surprise is what breaks control. Training removes surprise. Expose yourself to controlled pressure intentionally. Timed work. Difficult conversations. High-stakes decisions. Practice staying slow while conditions are demanding. This is how steadiness is built. Not by avoiding pressure. By meeting it prepared. Stillness is portable. It works in calm moments. It works under strain. That is why it is a skill. Skills function regardless of conditions. Most people are calm only when nothing is happening. That is not control. Control holds when something is happening. That's the key. When pressure appears, reduce output. Fewer words. Fewer movements. This concentrates energy. Concentrated energy produces cleaner action. Diffuse energy creates mistakes. You do not need to solve everything immediately. You need to prevent escalation. Stillness does that automatically. Pressure also tempts emotional identification. You begin to feel attacked, judged, challenged. This personalizes the situation. Personalization destroys objectivity. Stillness removes personalization. You observe pressure instead of becoming it. That separation restores clarity. You are not the pressure. You are responding to it. That mental distance is control. You have a choice. Fuse with the moment. Or stand apart and decide. Only one produces authority. That's the key. Under pressure, the correct response is often minimal. A short statement. A delayed decision. No explanation. Minimal response preserves flexibility. Flexibility is power under pressure. Once you commit too early, options disappear. Stillness keeps options open. This is not indecision. It is strategic patience. Patience applied under pressure is rare. That is why it works. Over time, people will notice something. You are harder to rush. Harder to provoke. Harder to destabilize. Not because you resist. Because you do not move prematurely. This changes how others treat you. Pressure stops being applied where it no longer works. That's the key. Staying steady under pressure requires daily reinforcement. Breath control. Paced movement. Intentional pauses. These are not emergency tools. They are habits. Habits decide behavior before pressure appears. Train them when nothing is at stake. Then rely on them when something is. You are not trying to eliminate pressure. You are removing its authority. Pressure will exist. It will not control you. That is discipline. That is strength. You learned how to remain steady when conditions intensify. Now it's time to understand what happens when discipline replaces urgency completely. Urgency feels important. It feels necessary. It feels justified. It is usually false. Urgency is not a signal of importance. It is a signal of lost control. Most people live under constant urgency. They rush decisions. They rush speech. They rush movement. They believe this is productivity. It is not. It is reaction wearing a schedule. That's the key. Urgency compresses thinking. It narrows options. It forces premature commitment. Discipline does the opposite. Discipline expands time. It restores sequence. It protects clarity. When you choose discipline over urgency, outcomes stabilize. Most mistakes are not caused by bad intent. They are caused by rushed timing. Words spoken too fast. Decisions made too early. Actions taken before alignment. Urgency demands speed. Discipline demands order. Only one produces control. You have a choice. Respond to urgency. or enforce discipline. One drains authority, the other builds it. That's the key. Urgency often comes from external pressure. Deadlines, expectations, other people's anxiety. When you accept their urgency, you inherit their instability. That is not leadership. Leadership sets tempo. People with discipline move at a deliberate pace. They do not match chaos. They absorb pressure without accelerating. This changes dynamics immediately. When you slow down, urgency loses leverage. It cannot force movement without compliance. You do not need their permission to move at your pace. That's the key. Urgency also comes from internal discomfort. The need to resolve tension quickly. The desire to escape uncertainty. Most people rush because waiting feels uncomfortable. Discipline tolerates discomfort. It allows uncertainty to exist without reaction. This is mental strength. Waiting is not weakness when it is intentional. Intentional waiting produces better decisions than fast action. Urgency wants closure. Discipline wants correctness. Only one should win. Stillness is the tool that enforces discipline. When urgency appears, reduce output. Fewer words. Slower movement. This interrupts momentum. Momentum is what urgency feeds on. Starve it. Let clarity arrive. That's the key. Urgency often disguises itself as responsibility. I have to respond now. I need to fix this immediately. Most of the time, you do not. Responsibility is not speed. Responsibility is accuracy. Accuracy requires time. Even a small amount. Discipline creates that time. People trust those who are not rushed. They feel safe around stable pace. Stability signals competence. Urgency signals insecurity. This is why disciplined individuals gain influence quietly. They are not loud. They are not fast. They are consistent. Consistency builds authority. That's the key. Urgency also destroys attention. It fragments focus. It pulls energy in multiple directions. Discipline protects attention by sequencing action. One thing at a time. In order. Urgency wants everything now. That creates exhaustion. Exhaustion weakens judgment. Judgment weakened invites more. Urgency. This cycle traps most people. Discipline breaks it. When something feels urgent, pause intentionally. Ask one question. What actually needs to happen first? Not everything. Not immediately. First. This restores structure. Structure dissolves urgency. That's the key. Discipline does not ignore deadlines. It respects them properly. It plans ahead. It moves early. It avoids last-minute pressure. Urgency lives where planning failed. Discipline eliminates its habitat. Most people wait. Then rush. Discipline acts early. Then remains calm. This is the long-term advantage. Stillness allows foresight. Foresight reduces urgency. Under discipline, time becomes an ally. Under urgency, time becomes an enemy. You have a choice. Turn time into pressure. Or turn it into leverage. Only one produces control. That's the key. Urgency also pushes people to over-communicate. Too many messages. Too many explanations. This creates confusion. Discipline simplifies communication. Clear. Minimal. Silence where speech adds nothing. This keeps attention focused. Urgency scatters attention. Discipline concentrates it. Concentration produces results. When discipline replaces urgency, life slows internally. Externally, progress accelerates. Because fewer mistakes need correction. This is efficiency, not speed. Efficiency outperforms speed over time. That's the key. Train discipline daily. Schedule deliberately. Prepare early. Leave margin. Margin absorbs pressure. People without margin live in urgency. Margin is invisible strength. Stillness creates margin. When you are not rushed internally, time expands perceptually. You see options others miss. You choose better moments to act. This compounds. Over time, urgency stops appearing. Not because life is easier. Because you are prepared. Prepared minds do not panic. Prepared systems do not rush. Prepared individuals control tempo. That is discipline in action. You learned how to remain steady. You learned how to reject false urgency. Now it's time to understand what happens when discipline shapes attention completely. Attention is not neutral. It is directional. Where attention goes, behavior follows. Where behavior follows, outcomes appear. Most people never guard this. They allow attention to be pulled. By noise. By emotion. By urgency. This is why discipline collapses. Attention is the gateway. If it is unprotected, nothing else holds. That's the key. Most people believe distraction is harmless. It is not. Distraction fragments judgment. It weakens memory. It erodes patience. Small losses. Repeated constantly. The damage compounds quietly. Reaction thrives in fragmented attention. Stillness requires focus. When attention is scattered, control disappears. You have a choice. You can let attention drift. Or you can guard it deliberately. One creates weakness. The other creates leverage. That's the key. Attention is stolen in small moments. A notification. A thought. A glance. None of these feel significant alone. Together, they destroy depth. Depth is where discipline operates. Shallow attention produces shallow decisions. Most people live shallow. They react because they never see the whole picture. Guarding attention restores vision. When attention is protected, you notice timing, patterns, consequences. This reduces mistakes before they happen. Most errors are not accidents. They are attention failures. Stillness protects attention by reducing input. Less noise. Less reaction. More clarity. That's the key. Attention is finite. It runs out. Spend it carelessly, and discipline weakens by default. Most people spend attention before deciding where it belongs. That is backwards. Discipline allocates attention intentionally. Before you act. Before you speak. Before you engage. This is mental budgeting. What receives attention grows. If distraction receives it, distraction grows. If discipline receives it, control grows. You do not need their permission to withdraw attention. That's the key. Guarding attention means reducing exposure. Not everything deserves access. Not every conversation. Not every thought. Not every request. Attention given is energy spent. Spend it where it produces return. Most people confuse availability with responsibility. They feel obligated to respond, to engage, to participate. This is how attention is drained. Responsibility is not availability. Responsibility is stewardship. Stewardship means deciding what enters the mind. Stillness enforces this boundary. When you slow down, fewer things get through. Only what matters remains. That's the key. Guarding attention also applies internally. Not every thought deserves focus. Not every worry deserves rehearsal. The mind generates noise constantly. If you follow it, attention fractures. If you observe without engagement, attention stabilizes. Thought loses influence when attention is removed. This is discipline at the source. Most people try to fix behavior downstream. They fail. Attention is upstream. Protect it there. Stillness gives you the ability to notice where attention goes. Without stillness, attention moves too fast to track. This is why constant stimulation destroys awareness. Guarding attention requires reduction. Fewer inputs. Fewer commitments. Fewer distractions. This is not minimalism for aesthetics. It is minimalism for control. Less input creates more output. That's the key. Attention must also be protected from emotion. Strong feelings pull focus inward. They narrow perception. They distort judgment. Stillness prevents emotional hijacking. By creating distance. Distance allows choice. Choice restores control. When emotion appears, observe it without feeding it attention. It will pass. When attention feeds emotion, it intensifies. That is the difference. Most people magnify emotion unconsciously. Discipline removes the magnification. Attention decides intensity. Guard it. You have a choice. Follow every internal pull. Or select deliberately what deserves focus. One creates chaos. The other creates stability. That's the key. Externally, guard attention by structuring environment. Silence unnecessary notifications. Limit exposure to noise. Reduce visual clutter. Environment shapes attention before willpower engages. Discipline designs environment intentionally. Do not rely on resistance alone. Remove temptation at the source. This conserves energy. Energy preserved strengthens discipline. Most people exhaust themselves resisting distraction. Disciplined people eliminate it. That's the key. Guarding attention also means sequencing tasks. One task at a time. In order. Multitasking fractures attention. It feels efficient. It produces poor results. Depth outperforms speed. Speed without depth creates rework. Rework creates urgency. Urgency creates reaction. Guarding attention prevents this chain. Stillness allows depth. Depth produces quality. Quality reduces correction. This is how control compounds. You are not trying to do more. You are trying to do less, better. That requires attention discipline. Most people fail here because guarding attention feels restrictive. They fear missing out. They fear being unavailable. In reality, unguarded attention costs far more. It costs clarity. It costs authority. It costs time. Guarding attention restores all three. That's the key. You do not owe attention to everything that calls for it. Attention is not a courtesy. It is a resource. Treat it as such. Allocate it deliberately. When something tries to pull your focus, pause. Ask one question. Does this deserve my attention right now? If not, withdraw. No explanation required. You don't need their permission to protect your attention. That's the key. Over time, something shifts. Your mind becomes quieter. Decisions become clearer. Reactions become rare. Not because life is calmer. Because attention is guarded. Stillness becomes sustainable. Control becomes consistent. People notice this. Not because you announce it. But because you are harder to distract. Harder to rush. Harder to destabilize. This changes how others engage with you. Attention is respected where it is protected. Neglected where it is not. Guard it. You learned how to replace urgency with discipline. Now you are learning how to protect the source of discipline itself. Next, it is time to integrate this control into action. Action reveals control. Or the lack of it. Most people act with noise. Emotional noise. Mental noise. Urgent noise. They move quickly. They speak quickly. They decide quickly. Speed feels powerful. It is not. Noise contaminates action. When emotion leads, judgment follows late. That's the key. Action without control creates consequences you then have to manage. This is how people stay busy without progress. They spend life correcting what never needed to happen. Acting without emotional noise is not hesitation. It is precision. It is the ability to move cleanly. Clean action produces clean outcomes. Most mistakes are not caused by lack of effort. They are caused by emotional interference. Anger, anxiety, excitement, fear. Each one distorts timing. Stillness neutralizes this distortion. When emotion rises, pause. Not to suppress it. To separate from it. Observation creates distance. Distance creates choice. You have a choice. That's the key. Emotion wants immediate release. Action feels like relief. But relief is not resolution. When you act to relieve emotion, you surrender control. Discipline acts after emotion settles. This delay is strength. Most people cannot tolerate the pause. They mistake discomfort for urgency. Urgency is rarely real. It is emotional pressure. Stillness reveals this. When you wait, urgency weakens. Clarity strengthens. Then action becomes accurate. Acting without emotional noise means slowing the internal process, not the external result. It means letting emotion pass without permission to decide. You don't need their permission. That's the key. Think of the last time you reacted emotionally. The message sent too fast. The decision made too early. The words spoken too much. The regret came later. This pattern repeats because emotion hijacks timing. Discipline restores timing. Timing is power. When you act at the right moment, effort decreases. Results improve. Stillness sharpens timing. This is why calm people appear strategic. They are not slower. They are precise. Acting without emotional noise also applies to positive emotion. Excitement causes overcommitment. Confidence turns into overexposure. Joy turns into excess. Noise is noise, regardless of tone. Discipline treats all emotion the same. It observes. It waits. It decides cleanly. That's the key. Before any action, ask one question. Is this coming from clarity or emotion? If emotion is present, wait. Waiting is not avoidance. It is control. When clarity arrives, act fully. No hesitation. No apology. This is disciplined action. Most people reverse this order. They act emotionally. Then think later. That creates chaos. Acting without emotional noise creates stability. Stability builds trust. In yourself. In others. People trust those who move without volatility. They sense control. This changes how your actions land. Words carry more weight. Decisions hold longer. Because they are not reactive. That's the key. Emotional noise also appears as internal pressure. The need to prove. To defend. To justify. This noise pushes action prematurely. Silence removes this pressure. When you stop explaining yourself, action becomes enough. Results speak. You don't need their permission to wait. That's the key. Acting cleanly also means fewer actions. Not everything requires response. Not every situation needs engagement. Restraint is action. Non-action is often the strongest move. Most people confuse movement with effectiveness. Discipline chooses impact over motion. Stillness allows selection. Selection prevents waste. This is high-level control. Act only when action changes something. Otherwise, observe. Observation is not passive. It is data collection. Data improves future action. This is how discipline compounds. Over time, something shifts. You stop reacting. You stop explaining. You stop rushing. Your actions become fewer, but stronger, cleaner, more final. People feel this difference. They adjust around it. Not because you demand respect, because your actions carry weight. That's the key. Emotion will always appear. Control is not eliminating it. Control is denying it authority. Emotion informs. Discipline decides. This order must not change. If it does, control collapses. Practice this daily. Pause before action. Name the emotion. Wait for clarity. Then act once. Fully. This rewires behavior. Action becomes intentional. Noise fades. Stillness becomes default. You have a choice. Act emotionally and manage consequences. Or act deliberately and reduce them. That's the key. You learned how to guard attention. Now you learned how to act without emotional interference. The final step is integration. Control is not something you turn on. It is something you live from. Most people treat discipline like a switch. They use it when things feel urgent. They abandon it when things feel calm. That is why control never stabilizes. Control must become the default state. Not effort. Not intensity. Not motivation. Default. That's the key. A default is what happens without thought. Right now, for most people, reaction is the default. They react before noticing. They speak before deciding. They move before thinking. Discipline is optional in their system. That must reverse. Control must come first. Everything else must wait. You have a choice. That's the key. Making control your default means removing negotiation. You do not ask how you feel. You do not ask if it is comfortable. You act from structure. Structure replaces emotion as the driver. This is how calm becomes stable. Stillness becomes automatic. Reaction loses authority. Most people believe control requires constant effort. It does not. It requires consistency. Once the pattern is established, effort drops. This is how habits work. What you repeat becomes natural. If you repeat pausing, pausing becomes instinct. If you repeat observation, observation becomes automatic. This is trained behavior. Stillness is a skill. That's the key. To make control your default, you must simplify decisions. Too many choices weaken discipline. You already know what works. Pause before responding. Observe before acting. Speak only when necessary. There is no need to reinvent this daily. Remove debate. Debate invites emotion. Rules remove it. Set internal rules. No instant replies. No emotional decisions. No explaining yourself. Rules create predictability. Predictability creates stability. Stability creates authority. You don't need their permission to live this way. That's the key. Control as a default also means accepting silence. Silence will feel uncomfortable at first. Because reaction has been your outlet. Stillness removes that release. This is where most people fail. They mistake discomfort for danger. Discomfort is not danger. It is adjustment. If you stay still, the discomfort passes. If you react, the pattern stays. This choice appears daily, sometimes hourly. Each time, you reinforce one system: reaction or control. You have a choice. That's the key. A controlled life is quieter. Fewer explanations. Fewer conflicts. Fewer regrets. Not because nothing happens, but because nothing unnecessary happens. Your energy stops leaking. Your attention stabilizes. Your decisions become cleaner. People begin to feel your presence differently. You are not louder. You are not aggressive. You are steady. Steadiness changes dynamics. It changes how people speak to you, how situations unfold. Because volatility is gone. That's the key. Making control your default also requires patience with progress. You will fail sometimes. You will react. You will speak too fast. This does not undo the system. Only quitting does. Discipline is not perfection. It is correction without drama. Notice the slip. Reset immediately. No self-criticism. No justification. Just return to stillness. That is control. Stillness is not fragile. It is resilient. You can return to it at any moment. You don't need permission. That's the key. As control becomes default, urgency loses influence. Everything slows internally. Externally, results improve. You stop rushing outcomes. You focus on positioning. Right action at the right time replaces force. Force exhausts. Precision multiplies. This is strategic living. It applies to work, to relationships, to conflict. Especially to conflict. When others escalate, you don't follow. You wait. Waiting shifts leverage. Most people cannot wait. That's why they lose control. Stillness holds it. That's the key. Control as default also changes identity. You stop seeing yourself as reactive. You stop identifying with emotion. You become the observer first. This internal shift is permanent if maintained. Emotion still exists. It just no longer commands. This is not suppression. It is hierarchy. Emotion reports. Discipline decides. This order must not change. When it does, instability returns. Guard this order. Daily. Quietly. Without announcement. You don't need their permission to be disciplined. That's the key. Eventually, control stops feeling like effort. It feels like alignment. You stop fighting yourself. The mind becomes quieter. Not empty. Clear. Clarity reduces error. Error reduction improves outcomes more than motivation ever could. This is why disciplined people appear confident. They are not guessing. They are not reacting. They are aligned. This alignment is built, not discovered. It is trained through repetition. Pause. Observe. Decide. Repeat. That's the system. Simple. Demanding. Effective. You have a choice. Live reactively and manage chaos. Or live deliberately and reduce it. That's the key. This audiobook was never about calm for comfort. It was about control for clarity. Stillness as a strategic advantage. Discipline as freedom. Attention as power. If you apply this daily, life changes quietly. Less friction. Less noise. More leverage. Not because the world changes. Because you do. Control is no longer something you reach for. It is where you stand. Make it your default. And keep it there. Reaction has been exposed. Not as action. As weakness. You now understand where control is lost. And where it is reclaimed. Stillness is no longer abstract. It is trained. Practiced. Applied. Discipline replaces urgency. Observation replaces impulse. Choice replaces reflex. From this point forward, reaction is optional. And control is deliberate. Carry this into every moment. Every message. Every decision. Stop reacting. Hold the pause. Act with authority. This is not motivation. This is alignment. Reaction ends here.